My sister-in-law invited me to dinner, insisting I try her secret recipe. Reluctantly I went, but a last-minute work call delayed me. She ate first, claiming she couldn't wait. Moments later she collapsed. At the hospital we discovered the dish was laced with poison, intended for me. Her husband confessed. He'd orchestrated it, hoping to frame her for my murder, but why he wanted to do this to me? The phone rang 3 times before I answered it, hesitating as Karen's name flashed across my screen. My sister-in-law rarely called, especially since David's funeral 8 months ago. Our relationship had cooled to obligatory birthday texts and awkward run-ins at the grocery store, where we'd exchange pleasantries before hurrying in opposite directions. "Hello," I answered, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder while sorting through case files on my desk. "Ellie." Karen's voice sounded unnaturally bright. "I was hoping to catch you. Mark and I would love to have you over for dinner tomorrow night. It's been too long." The invitation hung in the air as I flipped through my mental calendar. There was nothing scheduled, but the thought of sitting across from them at their dining table made my skin prickle with discomfort. The last time we'd gathered, the conversation had devolved into thinly veiled accusations about David's medical decisions. Mark had suggested I should have pushed for experimental treatments, while Karen sat silently, twisting her wedding ring. "Before we begin, I want to thank you for being part of this journey. If you're enjoying these suspenseful tales of betrayal, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps support more stories like this one. Why would someone go to such deadly lengths at a family dinner? What sinister motive lies beneath this poisoned meal? Subscribe now to uncover every shocking twist in this dark tale of greed and survival." "I don't know, Karen. Things have been hectic at the firm." A convenient half-truth. "Please, Ellie. I've been working on Grandma Rose's secret recipe. You know, her famous pot roast? The one from that little recipe book you inherited." Her voice took on an odd, insistent quality. "I've finally perfected it and I want you to try it. It would mean a lot to me." I frowned, twirling a pen between my fingers. Karen had never shown interest in family recipes before. In fact, during holiday gatherings, she'd often make comments about how outdated Grandma's cooking was compared to her modern, health-conscious meals. She'd once referred to the family cookbook as a heart attack waiting to happen. "You're cooking Grandma's pot roast?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. "Yes. I found her notes in some of David's things," she explained quickly. "It feels like a way to connect, you know? After everything." The mention of David's belongings softened me slightly. We'd divided his possessions after the funeral, a process that had been clinical and distant. Perhaps this was Karen's attempt at bridging the gap between us. "Sure," I conceded. "What time?" 7 o'clock. "And Ellie." Her voice dropped to an almost conspiratorial whisper. "Don't eat beforehand. This is special." After hanging up, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that settled over me. The timing seemed suspicious. Uncle William had passed away just 3 weeks ago, and the reading of his will was scheduled for next Monday. I was his only niece, and rumors had circulated within the family that I might be a significant beneficiary, as I'd spent summers caring for him while my parents traveled for work. Karen and Mark's sudden desire to reconnect seemed too coincidental. They'd barely acknowledged me at Uncle William's funeral, aside from Mark's firm handshake and questions about when the estate would be settled. His financial consulting business had reportedly hit rough waters recently. I'd overheard snippets at the reception about layoffs and lost clients. The next day progressed normally until 4:30 p.m., when my paralegal Jen rushed into my office. Her face was pinched with concern as she placed a folder on my desk. "I think you should look at these," she said. "They're the trust documents for the William Taylor estate. There are inconsistencies in the signature dates. See here? This addendum is dated after your uncle was hospitalized, but before his death. The handwriting doesn't quite match the original." I flipped through the papers, my heartbeat quickening. The amended trust appeared to redirect assets in the event of premature death of primary beneficiaries. My name was specifically mentioned. "This needs to be verified," I said, reaching for the phone. "Call Judge Harrington. We need these documents examined before the official reading." The call stretched beyond expectation as we waited for the judge's clerk to locate similar documentation. By the time we finished, it was 6:40 p.m. Karen's dinner was in 20 minutes and I hadn't left the office. I texted her quickly, running late. Work emergency. Start without me. Be there ASAP. Her response came immediately. No. Please hurry. The recipe is time sensitive. It won't be the same if it sits too long. I gathered my things, that sense of unease growing stronger. As I navigated rush hour traffic, my phone buzzed again. It was another text from Karen. Please hurry, Mark is acting strange. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. Before I could try again, another message appeared. Never mind, everything's fine. The contradictory messages sent a chill down my spine. I remembered David mentioning Mark's temper once, how he'd seen him kick a wall after a bad day at work. My brother had laughed it off, just letting off steam, but the memory carried new weight now. I was 10 minutes from their house when a black sedan cut me off, forcing me to slam on my brakes. My phone flew from the passenger seat onto the floor. As I pulled over to retrieve it, I noticed an envelope had slipped from my briefcase. Uncle William's personal letter to me, given to his attorney with instructions to pass it to me before the official will reading. I hadn't opened it yet, saving it for a moment when I could give it proper attention. But something compelled me to break the seal now, reading by the glow of my dashboard lights. My dearest Eleanor, it began in Uncle William's shaky handwriting. If you're reading this, then my suspicions were correct. Trust no one, especially those who suddenly seek your company. The accident that took your parents wasn't random. The same people responsible are likely circling now that I'm gone. The evidence is in the family Bible, hidden in the lining. Be careful, my girl. My hands trembled as I folded the letter. My parents' car accident had been ruled a mechanical failure 12 years ago. Uncle William had never mentioned suspicions before. As I approached Karen and Mark's driveway, the colonial house loomed against the darkening sky. Lights glowed from within, warm and inviting. But the text messages, the letter, and the timing of this dinner swirled in my mind. My phone buzzed one final time as I parked behind Mark's Mercedes. I've set your place at the table. Don't worry about being late. Family dinner is long overdue. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my car, clutching my keys in one hand and the folder of trust documents in the other. Whatever awaited me inside, I was determined to face it with open eyes. I knocked twice before using the spare key that had been mine since David died. The entryway light cast long shadows across the recently installed marble flooring, part of the renovation project Karen had enthusiastically described at David's wake, timing that had struck me as odd even then. Karen. I called out, removing my coat. The house smelled of rosemary and garlic, rich and inviting despite my apprehension. In the dining room, she answered, her voice lighter than usual. I've already started. I made my way through the living room, noting the new furniture and artwork that seemed excessive for a couple reportedly facing financial challenges. The dining room appeared transformed from my last visit. Crystal chandelier, custom drapery, and an antique table that hadn't been there before. Karen sat alone, a half-filled wine glass beside her plate. She wore a navy dress I'd never seen, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo that seemed excessive for a casual family dinner. Her plate had food on it, but it looked more rearranged than eaten. I couldn't wait, she said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. After spending all day cooking, my stomach was growling. Her laugh didn't reach her eyes, which darted toward the kitchen door repeatedly. Where's Mark? I asked, setting my bag on a nearby chair, keeping the folder of documents close. Last-minute errand, she replied too quickly. He forgot wine. You know how he insists on pairing everything perfectly. She gestured to the chair across from her, where an immaculate place setting awaited. Please sit. I'll serve you while it's still warm. The table was exquisitely arranged. Grandmother's china that should have been in my possession according to David's will, sterling silver flatware, and crystal glasses that caught the light. My plate sat empty, while a large serving dish covered with a silver dome occupied the center of the table. You've gone to a lot of trouble, I said, remaining standing. Should we wait for Mark? No. Karen's response came too sharply. She softened her tone immediately. I mean, he insisted we shouldn't wait. The roast will dry out. She reached for the serving dish. Let me plate this for you. I studied her as she lifted the dome, revealing a beautifully arranged roast with vegetables. Her hands trembled slightly, and a thin sheen of sweat had formed on her forehead despite the cool temperature of the room. "You mentioned Grandma's recipe," I said, slowly taking my seat. "I don't remember her pot roast looking quite like this." "I added my own touches," Karen replied, serving a generous portion onto my plate. The meat glistened with sauce, surrounded by roasted root vegetables. "I've been experimenting with herbs from our garden." As she set the plate before me, I noticed a slight discoloration in the sauce that seemed pooled more on my serving than what remained in the dish. Karen returned to her seat, lifting her wine glass. "A toast," she suggested, "to family reconciliation." I raised my glass cautiously, watching as she took a deep sip. Something flickered across her face. Doubt, perhaps, or fear. "Aren't you going to try it?" she asked, nodding toward my untouched plate. "After all my hard work?" I cut a small piece of meat, lifting it slightly before setting my fork down. "Actually, could I get some water first?" Karen's expression tightened momentarily before she rose. "Of course. I forgot to put out water glasses." As she turned toward the kitchen, she swayed slightly, grabbing the edge of the table to steady herself. "Are you okay?" I asked, rising from my chair. "Just a little lightheaded," she murmured, blinking rapidly. "I haven't eaten much today, and the wine." She took another step and reached again for her glass, taking a larger sip as if to prove she was fine. Mid-swallow, her expression changed. Her eyes widened in panic, her free hand flying to her throat. "Karen." I moved toward her as the glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. She tried to speak, but only a strangled sound emerged. Her body began to convulse and she collapsed before I could reach her. I caught her head before it hit the floor, lowering her gently as her limbs jerked uncontrollably. "Karen, what's happening?" I rolled her onto her side as foam formed at the corners of her mouth. Her eyes, wide with terror, locked onto mine. I scrambled for my phone, cursing when the no-service message appeared on my screen. I ran to the kitchen searching for the house phone, finding it dead when I lifted the receiver. The spare handset in the living room showed the same result, its battery compartment empty. Back at Karen's side, I checked her breathing, finding it shallow and irregular. Her purse sat on a side table and I dumped its contents, searching for her phone. When I found it, the screen was cracked and it wouldn't power on. "Hold on, Karen," I pleaded, frantically searching for anything to help. "I need to get help." I ran to the front door, intending to drive her to the emergency room myself, when I spotted a landline on a small table in the foyer. Miraculously, this one had a dial tone. I punched in 911, my hands shaking as I reported a poisoning emergency. "My sister-in-law collapsed after drinking wine. She's convulsing. I think she's been poisoned." While waiting for the ambulance, I returned to Karen, who had stopped seizing but was now frighteningly still. Her breathing came in short, shallow gasps. As I loosened her clothing to help her breathe, a folded paper fell from the pocket of her dress. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it, revealing Karen's hurried handwriting. "Ellie, don't eat anything. I think he's..." The note ended abruptly, the pen trailing off into a jagged line. A cold realization washed over me. Karen had suspected something but hadn't completed her warning. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows as the ambulance arrived. As paramedics rushed in with equipment, I glanced at my still untouched plate and then at Karen's barely eaten food. On impulse, I grabbed a clean napkin and carefully wrapped a sample of both our portions, slipping them into my bag along with Karen's unfinished note. "What happened here?" a paramedic asked as they attached monitoring equipment to Karen. "I don't know," I answered truthfully, watching her oxygen levels display critically low numbers on their portable monitor. "But I think someone tried to kill us both." The ambulance tore through suburban streets, sirens wailing as paramedics worked over Karen's limp form. I sat pressed against the side wall, answering rapid-fire questions while watching her oxygen levels dip dangerously low on the monitor. "Has she taken any medications? Recreational drugs? Alcohol?" "Just wine," I replied, remembering how deliberately she'd sipped from her glass. "But I think it was poisoned." The paramedic gave me a sharp look. "That's a serious allegation." "I know," I said, clutching my bag containing the food samples. "That's why I brought this." We arrived at Mercy General in a blur of motion. Karen was whisked through double doors while I was directed to a waiting area, still clutching my evidence. A nurse with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair approached after I'd been sitting there for 20 minutes. Miss Taylor? I'm Nurse Chen. I need to ask you some questions while they work on your sister-in-law. I nodded, following her to a small consultation room. You mentioned possible poisoning, she said, closing the door behind us. But I need to ask something else first. She lowered her voice. Has your sister-in-law ever mentioned fear of her husband? Any unexplained injuries? Changes in behavior? The question caught me off guard. You think this is domestic violence? We have protocols, she explained gently. When a married woman comes in with unexplained toxic symptoms, especially when the husband isn't present. She let the implication hang in the air. I don't know, I admitted. We haven't been close recently. But she sent me strange texts before I arrived saying Mark was acting oddly. And I found this in her pocket. I showed her the partial note. Nurse Chen's expression darkened. I'll inform Dr. Patel. In the meantime, you mentioned evidence. I handed over the napkin containing food samples. From both our plates. Mine was untouched. She took it carefully. I'll have this sent to toxicology immediately. An hour passed in the waiting room before the automated doors slid open, revealing Mark. His normally impeccable appearance was disheveled. Tie loosened, hair uncombed, eyes wild with what appeared to be panic. Ellie, he exclaimed, rushing toward me. What happened? I got a call. They said Karen's been hospitalized. His voice cracked, drawing sympathetic glances from others in the waiting area. She collapsed during dinner, I said, watching his face carefully. After drinking her wine. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise? Fear? It vanished quickly, replaced by convincing distress. I should have been there, he said, running his hands through his hair. If I hadn't gone out for more wine. Where exactly did you go? I asked. I tried calling your cell. Jensen's Liquor on Maple Street, he replied without hesitation. My phone died earlier today. Forgot to charge it last night. Been using my work phone. He pulled out a different device from his pocket. But the reception in that store is terrible. Basement level, you know. His explanation was smooth, too smooth, like he'd rehearsed it. Before I could probe further, Dr. Patel emerged through the double doors. Family of Karen Adams? We both stood. Dr. Patel, a petite woman with an authoritative presence, assessed us briefly before speaking. She's stabilized but still critical. Whatever toxin she ingested caused severe respiratory distress and cardiac arrhythmia. We've performed gastric lavage and administered activated charcoal. The next 24 hours will be crucial. Toxin. Mark's face paled. What do you mean, toxin? Dr. Patel's expression remained neutral. Preliminary tests suggest a powerful poison. We've expedited toxicology screening to identify it precisely. Can I see her? Mark asked, his voice breaking as he wiped away tears that seemed to appear on cue. Briefly, Dr. Patel answered. She's unconscious and intubated. As Mark followed the doctor, Detective Anthony Russo approached from the hospital entrance, flashing his badge discreetly. Miss Taylor? I'm Detective Russo. Could we speak privately? In a small conference room, the detective set up a recording device while explaining that poisoning cases automatically triggered police involvement. His questions were methodical, starting with basic facts before delving deeper. You mentioned receiving a dinner invitation. Do you still have it? I showed him the text messages on my phone. That's interesting, he said, scrolling through them. Our tech team pulled the digital records. These texts came from an IP address associated with Mark Adams' laptop, not Karen's phone. My breath caught. He sent them pretending to be Karen? It appears so, Detective Russo confirmed. We've also retrieved security footage from Jensen's Liquor. Mr. Adams did enter the store at 6:52 p.m. and purchase a bottle of red wine. However, his car was captured on traffic cameras near your office building earlier today, around the time you would have been at work. The implications made my skin crawl. You think he was watching me? We're investigating all possibilities, he replied diplomatically. A nurse interrupted, informing us that toxicology had preliminary results. Detective Russo asked to join the consultation and Dr. Patel agreed, her expression grave as she reviewed the report. We've identified the substance as tetrodotoxin, combined with a paralytic agent, she explained. It's extremely rare and highly lethal, typically found in certain marine animals, but this appears to be a synthetic variant. Like something an exterminator might use? I asked, remembering news reports about professional-grade poisons. Similar chemical structure, yes, Dr. Patel confirmed. But this isn't something you'd find in a hardware store. The combination suggests sophisticated knowledge of biochemistry. Detective Russo made notes. I'd like to question Mr. Adams about this. When confronted with the toxicology results, Mark's performance was flawless. Shock, confusion, and vehement denial of any knowledge about such substances. He mentioned Karen's gardening hobby, suggesting she might have accidentally contaminated herself with pesticides. I excused myself to use the restroom, emotionally drained by the evening's events. As I rounded the corner back toward Karen's room, I heard Mark's voice coming from a secluded alcove near the vending machines. The situation is complicated now, he whispered into his phone, unaware of my presence. We need to activate the contingency plan. No, they don't suspect anything yet, but we need to move quickly. The inheritance reading is still scheduled for Monday. I froze, pressing against the wall to avoid detection. If she doesn't make it through the night, we proceed as planned, he continued, his voice suddenly cold and businesslike, all traces of emotional distress gone. If she recovers, well, we'll need to be more creative. I retreated silently, my mind racing. The mask had slipped, revealing the calculation beneath Mark's grief. As I rejoined Detective Russo, my suspicions crystallized into certainty. My brother-in-law had tried to murder me tonight, and when that failed, he was already planning his next move. The question wasn't whether Mark was guilty. It was how to prove it before he had another opportunity to finish what he'd started. I lingered outside the alcove until Mark finished his call, my heart hammering against my ribs. When he emerged, I ducked into a nearby family waiting room, pretending to study a vending machine until he passed. Once he was gone, I made my way back to Detective Russo, who was reviewing notes in the hallway. I need to tell you something, I whispered, glancing around to ensure Mark wasn't nearby. I recounted the conversation I'd overheard, watching Russo's expression harden as I mentioned the inheritance. What inheritance? He asked, leading me to a more private area. My Uncle William passed away 3 weeks ago, I explained. The reading of his will is scheduled for Monday. I haven't discussed the details with anyone, but there were always rumors that I'd be his primary beneficiary. How substantial are we talking? Uncle William was a founding partner at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, I said. He never married or had children. His estate is valued at roughly $40 million. Detective Russo let out a low whistle. And this wasn't mentioned earlier because? I didn't connect it initially. Mark's never met Uncle William. He died before David married Karen and they weren't close. I hesitated. But there's something else. Uncle William and Karen had a falling out when she was a teenager. He caught her stealing from his home during a family gathering. He pressed charges, though they were later dropped. But he made it clear she was excluded from any inheritance. So if something happened to you, the money would likely go to my next of kin, Karen, I finished. And by extension, Mark would control it if Karen were incapacitated or dead, Russo completed grimly. Let me get a warrant to access their financial records. While Russo made calls, I returned to Karen's ICU room. Mark had stepped out, presumably to speak with doctors. Karen lay unconscious, tubes and wires connecting her to various machines. Her overnight bag sat in the corner, brought by Mark from their house. On impulse, I checked the bag, finding her tablet inside. I knew her password, David's birthday, from when she'd asked me to help her with tech issues in the past. The unlock screen revealed dozens of open tabs on financial articles, bankruptcy filings, and fraud investigations. One email caught my attention. A communication from the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding irregularities in client accounts at Adams Financial Consulting. The language was bureaucratic but clear. Mark's company was under investigation for misappropriating client funds. Another email from their mortgage company threatened foreclosure for missed payments. Tucked inside a zippered compartment of the bag, I found a small leather-bound journal. The most recent entry was dated just yesterday. He's monitoring my calls now. Says it's because he's worried about me, but I know better. The bank called again today. Another overdraft. Where is the money going? When I asked, Mark exploded, accused me of not trusting him. Said if I told anyone about our financial troubles he'd make me regret it. Uncle William's inheritance is Mark's obsession now. He keeps talking about how Ellie doesn't deserve it, how the family money should stay with real family. I've decided, after the will reading, I'm leaving. I've already spoken with a divorce attorney, hidden away enough cash for a deposit on an apartment. 3 more days. I just have to pretend everything's normal for 3 more days. I photographed the pages with my phone, hands trembling. Karen had been planning her escape and somehow Mark must have discovered it. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. A nurse entered to check Karen's vitals and I quickly returned the journal to its hiding place. Any change? I asked. Her stats are improving, the nurse responded, adjusting in 4. The doctor is cautiously optimistic. As she worked, I noticed prescription bottles in a clear plastic hospital property bag. One label caught my eye, lorazepam, prescribed to Karen by a doctor I didn't recognize. The date was recent, just 2 weeks ago. Detective Russo returned as I was examining the medication. We've got something, he said quietly, showing me his tablet. Security footage from 3 different chemical supply stores across state lines. Each purchase individually wouldn't raise flags, but together. The screen showed Mark, sometimes wearing disguises, purchasing various chemical compounds. Our lab says these are precursors to the poison found in Karen's system. And this, I added, pointing to the medication. Lorazepam at this dosage could cause memory issues, confusion, suggestibility. Russo looked troubled. Memory manipulation? It would explain a lot, I said. Karen's strange behavior, her contradictory messages. Our conversation was interrupted by a flurry of activity as Karen's monitors began beeping. Medical staff rushed in, pushing us into the hallway where Mark was returning with a coffee. What's happening? He demanded, performance of concern back in place. 20 tense minutes later, Dr. Patel emerged. She's regaining consciousness, but she's disoriented. We've removed the breathing tube. Can we see her? Mark asked, already moving toward the door. Briefly, Dr. Patel cautioned. And I should warn you, she's confused, which is normal after this kind of trauma. Karen's eyes fluttered open as we entered. They roamed the room, finally settling on me with a spark of recognition. Ellie, she whispered, voice raspy from the tube. You came to dinner. I did, I confirmed, approaching her bedside opposite from Mark. Her gaze shifted to Mark and a strange expression crossed her face. Not recognition, but something closer to bewilderment. Who? She began. It's me, honey, Mark said, taking her hand. Your husband. Karen's confusion deepened. Husband. She pulled her hand away. I don't. Where's David? Mark's facade cracked momentarily, a flash of annoyance crossing his features. David passed away, remember? 8 months ago. Karen's eyes filled with tears. No, that's not. David called me yesterday. We're having dinner on Saturday. She looked desperately at me. Tell him, Ellie. My blood ran cold as I realized what was happening. The medication had done more than make her suggestible. It had created gaps in her memory, confusion about time. Karen, I said gently, what's the last thing you remember clearly? Her brow furrowed in concentration. The fight, she whispered. With Mark. About the money. Her eyes widened suddenly, darting toward Mark. The tea. You made me tea every night. Her breathing quickened, monitors beeping in response. You've been drugging me. Mark's carefully constructed mask fell completely as Karen's words hung in the air. Before he could respond, Detective Russo stepped into the room, officer at his side. Mark Adams, he said formally, I'd like you to come with me for questioning regarding the attempted murder of Eleanor Taylor and the poisoning of Karen Adams. As they led Mark away, I stayed with Karen, whose eyes were now clear with dawning horror as fragments of memory began to resurface. He was going to kill you, she whispered. And then me. For the money. Mark's questioning at the police station gave me a window of opportunity. With Karen now under police protection in the hospital, I returned to my apartment to shower and change clothes before diving into what Detective Russo called civilian investigation. His polite way of asking me to stay out of police business. But I couldn't just wait. Not with Karen's life still potentially at risk and the will reading only days away. As an estate attorney, I had resources and contacts that could supplement the official investigation. My first call was to Meredith Young, an old law school friend who specialized in background checks for high-profile clients. I need everything you can find on Mark Adams, I explained, giving her his date of birth and social security number from documents I'd helped Karen file years ago. Particularly anything from before he moved to Boston 10 years ago. While waiting for Meredith's results, I contacted Uncle William's longtime attorney, Jerome Wasserman. Ellie, Jerome greeted me warmly. I was just reviewing William's papers for Monday's reading. How can I help? I need to verify the authenticity of Uncle William's will, I said, explaining the situation without revealing the ongoing police investigation. Has anyone requested copies recently? Or asked about specific provisions? Jerome was silent for a moment. That's an unusual question. As a matter of fact, someone claiming to be your financial advisor called last week asking about contingency clauses in the will. I didn't provide details, of course, but it struck me as odd. I don't have a financial advisor, I said, my suspicion deepening. Jerome, could you check if the will in your possession has been tampered with? I'll examine it immediately and call you back, he promised. My laptop pinged with an email from Meredith. The subject line made my blood run cold. Mark Adams doesn't exist. The attached report detailed how Mark Adams had appeared suddenly 10 years ago with a suspiciously clean credit history and minimal background. Facial recognition software matched him to a Michael Adler from Seattle, whose wife Cynthia had died from accidental poisoning in 2013. Authorities had investigated Michael, but couldn't gather enough evidence for charges. He'd disappeared shortly after collecting a substantial life insurance payout. My phone rang, Detective Russo. We've searched Mark's car, he said without preamble. Found a burner phone hidden under the spare tire. Multiple text messages to someone saved as Jay, discussing plans to make the dinner look like her idea, and ensuring clean transfer after both problems are eliminated. Both problems, I echoed. You and Karen, Russo clarified. There's more. Forensic accounting found offshore accounts receiving regular large deposits. The source appears to be his gambling debts, but not what you'd expect. He wasn't losing money, he was earning it. I don't understand. He wasn't a gambling addict, he was a loan shark, Russo explained. That's where his capital came from. And when clients couldn't pay, well, let's just say we're reopening some cases of clients who conveniently died before repaying their debts. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Mark hadn't just attempted murder on a whim, he was practiced at it. His real name is Michael Adler, I said, sharing Meredith's findings. His first wife died under suspicious circumstances. That matches what we're finding, Russo confirmed. Seattle PD is sending their case files. But here's something else. We executed a search warrant on their home computer. Found searches for inheritance law Massachusetts, undetectable poisons, how long does poison show in toxicology? But most disturbing, how to forge legal documents. My other line beeped, Jerome calling back. I need to take this, I told Russo. It's about Uncle William's will. Jerome's voice was grave. Ellie, something's wrong. The will in my possession appears genuine, but certain provisions don't match my notes. Specifically, there's a clause regarding redistribution of assets if primary beneficiaries predecease William or die within 60 days of his death. That clause wasn't in the original? No. William was very specific about your inheritance regardless of circumstances. I've retrieved our backup copy from secure storage. The documents don't match. The will was forged, I whispered. Not entirely, Jerome clarified. Most provisions are identical but key sections were altered. Very sophisticated work. Proper legal language, matching paper stock, even a reasonable approximation of William's signature. Without my original notes, I might never have noticed. When could this have happened? We had a break-in last month. Nothing was reported stolen, but... Jerome paused. Security cameras showed someone who resembles your brother-in-law, wearing a maintenance uniform. I thanked Jerome and called Russo back to share this development. While on the phone, my laptop pinged with another email from Meredith containing Michael Adler's Seattle address and contact information for former neighbors. Acting on impulse, I called the number for the house next door to where Michael/Mark had lived with his first wife. An elderly woman answered. Mrs. Patel? You don't know me, but I'm investigating Michael Adler, who lived next door to you about 10 years ago. That dreadful man, she said immediately. Are you with the police? I told them he killed poor Cynthia, but no one listened. What made you so sure? I asked. Besides watching him put drops in her tea when she wasn't looking? Mrs. Patel said dryly. The night she died, I heard them arguing about his other woman, a Julia, or Julie, something. When the ambulance came, he didn't seem surprised at all. Just stood there watching like he was waiting for it to be over. Julie. J. The same initial as the contact in the burner phone. I thanked Mrs. Patel and immediately called Russo again. Check if Mark has any connections to someone named Julie or Julia, I urged. I think she might be the accomplice from the texts. Already ahead of you, Russo replied. We found hotel receipts in his briefcase for 2 rooms under different names. Security footage shows him meeting with a woman who matches the description of his administrative assistant at his firm. What's her name? I asked, already suspecting the answer. Julie Newell, Russo confirmed. And get this. She recently purchased an industrial-grade paper shredder and cleaning chemicals typically used to remove biological evidence. The pieces were falling into place. Mark's identity change, the forged will, the accomplice. The more we discovered, the clearer it became that this wasn't a crime of opportunity, but a carefully orchestrated plot years in the making. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Not over yet. He's not working alone. Watch your back. K. Karen was warning me. Despite Mark being in custody, the danger hadn't passed. Someone else was still out there. Someone who had access to Karen's hospital room and knew she was regaining her memory. Someone who might still try to finish what Mark had started. Karen's warning text left me shaken. I forwarded it to Detective Russo, who arranged for an additional officer outside her hospital room and advised me to stay away until they could secure the situation. But I couldn't just sit in my apartment waiting. Not when answers were so close. I returned to the hospital the next morning, passing through increased security to reach Karen's room. She looked better, some color returning to her cheeks as she sat propped up in bed. The police officer stationed outside nodded as I entered. You got my message, she said, voice stronger than the previous day. How did you send it? I thought they took your phone as evidence. The nurse let me borrow hers. Karen's eyes darted to the door. They don't think I remember much, but it's coming back in pieces. Like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. I pulled a chair close to her bed. What do you remember? Karen's expression crumpled. Enough to know I helped him. Not intentionally, but... She pressed a tissue to her eyes. He's been drugging me for months. The tea every night. I thought it was his way of being sweet, taking care of me. That's not your fault, I assured her, taking her hand. But I called you Ellie. I remember that clearly now. He stood over me, told me exactly what to say. Made me invite you to dinner. Her voice broke. I was going to warn you when you arrived, but by then the drugs were stronger. He put something in my wine right before you came. The wine you drank instead of the food, I realized. Karen nodded. He was so angry when I started eating before you arrived. That wasn't part of his plan. He'd prepared your plate specially. With the poison. Yes, but I don't remember the food preparation. That whole afternoon is blank. He squeezed my hand. But I remember the arguments about money, his late-night phone calls with someone named Julie. And I remember finding paperwork about Uncle William's estate in his briefcase. I showed her the evidence we'd gathered, Mark's true identity, the forged will, the burner phone communications. With each revelation, Karen's expression shifted from shock to grief to anger. I married a stranger, she whispered. A murderer. We need to find Julie, I said. She's still out there and she might try to finish what Mark started. Karen's eyes widened suddenly. The hospital volunteer, the woman with the red hair who brings magazines. She's not a volunteer. I've seen her with Mark before. I immediately alerted the officer outside, who radioed the description to hospital security. Detective Russo called minutes later, confirming they were reviewing security footage to identify the woman. We need to draw her out, I said to Russo. Set a trap. Absolutely not, he replied firmly. Leave this to law enforcement. But after ending the call, Karen and I exchanged looks. "You have a plan," she said. "A risky one," I admitted. "But it might be our best chance to catch Julie and get more evidence against Mark." With Karen's approval, I made a very public phone call in the hospital cafeteria, speaking loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Yes, Jerome, I understand the concerns about Uncle William's will. Let's meet tomorrow to discuss expediting the inheritance distribution, given these extraordinary circumstances." I paused for dramatic effect. "Yes, I'll bring the original documents from my home safe. Noon at your office." "Thank you." After ending the call, I noticed a red-haired woman 2 tables away quickly gathering her things. Mission accomplished. Back in Karen's room, I explained the plan to the police officer, who reluctantly agreed to inform Detective Russo. We were setting up surveillance at my apartment and Jerome's office when a nurse interrupted with an unexpected visitor. A well-dressed man in his 50s who introduced himself as Robert Chin. "I was Mark's business partner until 6 months ago," he explained after the officer verified his identity. "I saw the news about his arrest. There are things you should know." According to Chin, their financial consulting firm had been legitimate until 3 years ago, when Mark began embezzling from client accounts to fund his offshore loan sharking operation. When Chin discovered the discrepancies and threatened to report them, Mark had staged an elaborate frame-up, making it appear that Chin was responsible. "He destroyed my reputation, my career, my marriage," Chin said bitterly. "I've been fighting to clear my name ever since, but he buried the evidence too well. Until now." Chin provided documentation of transfers, altered records and witness statements that would strengthen the case against Mark. As he was leaving, he hesitated at the door. "There's one more thing you should know. Mark has someone on the inside here at the hospital, not just his girlfriend Julie. Someone with medical access." Before we could press for details, Detective Russo called with disturbing news. The police had been monitoring Mark's jail communications and intercepted a call made to a hospital maintenance number. They traced it to a janitor named Ray Simmons who had just started his evening shift. "We have officers moving to apprehend him now," Russo explained. "But we need you to act normal if he enters the room. We've got audio surveillance in place." Barely 15 minutes later, Simmons entered with cleaning supplies, barely acknowledging us as he emptied trash bins and mopped the floor. As he worked near Karen's stand, I watched him carefully, noticing how his uniform pocket bulged with something that wasn't there when he entered. "Excuse me," I said, standing up. "I think you missed a spot over there." The distraction worked. As he turned, an officer slipped in behind him. When Simmons reached toward Karen's bag, he was immediately apprehended. A syringe filled with clear liquid fell from his pocket. Later that evening, Detective Russo played the recording from Karen's room. Simmons had been wearing a wire and Mark's instructions were chillingly clear. "Just add it to her when no one's looking. It'll look like heart failure from the previous poisoning. 5,000 now, 5,000 when it's done." Mark's voice was cold, methodical. "With both sisters gone, the inheritance flows exactly where we planned. Julie's already taken care of the paperwork. By this time tomorrow we'll be millionaires and no one will connect the dots." The evidence was damning, but Mark's mention of both sisters sent a chill through me. Karen wasn't my sister, she was my sister-in-law. Who was the other sister Mark had referenced? The answer came in a follow-up text from the unknown number. "Not just Julie. There's someone else. Someone closer. Watch your back tomorrow. I'll explain everything then. K." As night fell over the hospital and security tightened around Karen's room, I couldn't shake the feeling that the most dangerous revelation was still to come. Dawn broke over the hospital with shafts of pale gold light filtering through the blinds of Karen's room. I hadn't slept, instead keeping watch from the vinyl recliner beside her bed. Detective Russo's plan was risky but necessary. Mark had requested a meeting with Karen through his attorney, claiming he wanted to apologize. The district attorney had initially refused, but Karen herself had advocated for it. "It's our chance to get his full confession," she'd argued, her voice stronger than it had been since the poisoning. "Let him think he's manipulating me one last time." The plan was simple but dangerous. Karen would pretend to be heavily sedated during Mark's visit, barely conscious and unable to fully comprehend what was happening around her. I would be present as her medical proxy, ostensibly to ensure her well-being during the visit. Hidden microphones would capture everything, while Detective Russo and the district attorney would monitor from an adjacent room. "He won't confess if he thinks I'm listening," Karen said. "But if he believes I'm drugged, that I won't remember. His ego won't be able to resist." At precisely 10 o'clock, the door opened to reveal Mark in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him, escorted by 2 officers. He'd lost weight in the 5 days since his arrest, his face gaunt and shadowed with stubble. But his eyes remained calculating, scanning the room immediately. "You have 15 minutes, the officer said, securing Mark to a chair position between Karen's bed and where I sat. "Miss Taylor has agreed to remain present throughout." Mark nodded, not looking at me. "Hello, Karen," he said softly when the officers stepped outside. "They said you wanted to see me." Karen's performance was masterful. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and glassy. She mumbled something incoherent, then appeared to drift back to sleep. The doctors had removed all her IVs and monitors for this meeting, but Mark didn't know that. "She's heavily medicated," I explained coldly. "The doctors say she drifts in and out. Probably won't remember any of this." Mark's posture relaxed slightly. "How unfortunate," he said, though his tone suggested the opposite. "Though perhaps it's better this way. Easier for her to move on eventually." "Why did you do it?" I asked, letting genuine anger color my voice. Was Uncle William's money really worth all this? Mark studied me for a long moment, his expression shifting from calculated sympathy to something colder. "You have no idea what's really happening here, Ellie. You never did." "Then explain it to me," I challenged. "Karen won't remember, and I'm the one you tried to kill. Don't I deserve to know why?" A thin smile spread across his face. "Fair enough. Though I wasn't planning to kill you, just incapacitate you long enough to miss the will reading." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The fatal dose was meant for Karen all along." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "The perfect plan," he continued, warming to his subject. "Your death would look like an accident, directing your inheritance to Karen. Then her suicide, overcome with grief over another family tragedy, would leave everything to me as her husband. 2 deaths, $40 million, and not a fingerprint connecting me to either." "But why kill Karen at all?" I asked, genuinely confused. "As her husband, you'd have access to the money anyway." Mark's laugh was hollow. "Karen discovered my plans months ago. She was leaving me, had already contacted a divorce attorney. She just needed the inheritance to secure her escape." He glanced at Karen's seemingly unconscious form. "She was smarter than I gave her credit for. But not smart enough." "And Julie? Where does she fit into this?" "Insurance," Mark shrugged. "Someone to finish the job if I couldn't. Someone to split the blame if things went wrong. She's likely in Canada by now." Karen stirred slightly on the bed, a soft moan escaping her lips. Mark's eyes flickered to her, then back to me. "She won't recover fully, you know," he said casually. "The damage to her nervous system is permanent. The doctors just haven't told you yet." "You seem very well informed about her medical condition," I observed. "I did my research. Just like I researched how to accelerate your brother's cancer without raising suspicions." The room seemed to tilt around me. "David? What are you saying?" Mark's expression remained chillingly calm. "Incremental doses of thallium in his supplements. Undetectable unless specifically tested for. Mimics the symptoms of advancing lymphoma perfectly. It was essential to gain access to your family. After all, Uncle William's original will specified the inheritance would only go to you if you had no immediate family remaining. You killed my brother to get to Uncle William's money?" The horror of it threatened to overwhelm me. "Not immediately," Mark clarified, as if discussing a business strategy. "I needed him alive long enough to establish my position in the family. Then once I had access to William, arranging his accidental fall was simple enough. The old man never suspected his evening tea contained enough sedatives to make him dizzy." Karen's eyes remained closed, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the effort it took to maintain her facade of unconsciousness as she heard the truth about her husband. "You're a monster," I whispered. "I'm a businessman," Mark corrected. "A very good one. This was merely an investment strategy with unfortunate but necessary collateral damage." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "And the irony? Even from prison I still win. The money flows to Karen, and as her husband, I control her medical decisions if she's deemed incompetent. Which, after the unfortunate complications she's about to experience tonight, she certainly will be. What do you mean? I asked, real fear creeping into my voice. Let's just say hospital security isn't as tight as Detective Russo believes. Mark smiled. Julie may be gone, but there are other loyal employees who stand to benefit from my success. Before I could respond, the door swung open. Detective Russo entered, accompanied by the district attorney and 2 officers. Mark Adams, also known as Michael Adler, the district attorney announced formally, "You're now being charged with the first-degree murder of David Taylor and William Taylor, in addition to the attempted murders of Eleanor Taylor and Karen Adams." Mark's face went slack with shock. His eyes darted to Karen, who was now sitting fully upright, eyes clear and alert. "You were saying something about loyal employees?" she asked, voice steady. "We've apprehended your remaining accomplice, Dr. Spencer," Detective Russo added. "He's already confessing to falsifying David Taylor's medical records in exchange for reduced charges." As the officers moved to take Mark away, the district attorney held up a document. "We also have a warrant to collect DNA evidence linking you to William Taylor's home on the night of his death. The tests have already confirmed a match to hair samples found at the scene." Mark's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. He lunged toward me, restrained only by his handcuffs and the officer's quick reaction. "This isn't over," he snarled, his refined manner evaporating to reveal the predator beneath. "You have no idea what I'm capable of. None of you do." As they dragged him from the room, Karen finally allowed tears to fall. "David," she whispered. "He killed David." I moved to sit beside her on the bed, wrapping my arms around her shoulders. "I know," I said, my own grief fresh again. "But he won't hurt anyone else now." 3 weeks later, after the legitimate reading of Uncle William's will and Mark's arraignment on multiple charges, Karen and I stood on the porch of my brother's old summer cottage by the lake. A property I had inherited but never visited since his death. "Are you sure about this?" Karen asked, watching as I handed her a copy of the deed with her name added beside mine. "Absolutely," I nodded. "David would have wanted you to have it. And besides," I added with a tentative smile, $40 million is too much for one person. I think we both need a fresh start." Karen squeezed my hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "Family," she said simply. "Family," I agreed, unlocking the door to our shared future as the setting sun painted the lake in hues of gold and crimson, the colors of healing, not vengeance. Behind us, the shadows of the past began to recede, and though we would never forget what Mark had taken from us, we refused to let his darkness define our path forward.